Dr. Mason Grant looked at the baby boy in the crib and said 5 words Claire never forgot. "That's not my child." Minutes later, she was handed divorce papers right there in her hospital bed. But what if he always knew the child was his and rejected him anyway? Before we dive in, tap subscribe, hit like, and share this story if it stirs something in you. Every view helps us bring more stories like this to life. Now, let's begin. The day Claire Whitmore gave birth to her son should have been the happiest of her life. She had labored quietly, heart full of hope, waiting to meet the baby she created with the man she loved. But when Dr. Mason Grant entered her hospital room, his eyes didn't light up, they narrowed. He looked at the baby, then muttered, "That's not my child." Claire barely processed it when a nurse arrived with divorce papers. Mason had already signed. He walked out without holding the baby once. Claire stared at the papers with her name and Mason's signature stamped in bold. Her hands trembled as the weight of abandonment crushed her chest. He was gone, just like that. No warning, no hesitation. He had planned it coldly, precisely. The nurse offered no comfort and left. Claire held the baby closer, tears sliding down her cheeks. His tiny fingers curled around hers, anchoring her to reality. In that moment, she vowed something silently. She didn't know how yet, but she would make this count. 6 days later, Mason didn't return after the hospital. He vanished completely. No calls, no explanations. But in his rush to erase them, he made one small mistake. While moving out of their shared home days later, Mason forgot a flash drive in the study, a small, black USB that belonged to him. It contained encrypted medical files and genetic research. Claire didn't notice it. Everything felt like a blur. She boxed up the room in silence, heartbroken, unaware of what she was packing. The flash drive ended up buried in storage, collecting dust, just like the questions Mason never answered. Everyone assumed Claire would move out, but the townhouse in Lincoln Park had both their names on the deed. It was a wedding gift from her parents. She stayed. Mason already moved out, thinking she'd fall apart in silence. But Claire didn't run. She nursed her son Eli, cried in private, and stayed rooted in that house like stone. Mason didn't call, not even once. The world saw a polished neurosurgeon, speaking at conferences and smiling for magazines. But inside those walls, Claire was rebuilding, not with revenge but with resolve. She struggled alone. Friends stopped coming. Her research fellowship was quietly dropped. People whispered, pitted, gossiped. But Claire refused to collapse. She found freelance genetics work online. She built her way back. By the time Eli was 2, she'd launched her own lab, Whitmore Biogenetics, specializing in rare inherited conditions. She never mentioned Mason. She never needed to. While he shook hands with senators and posed beside Nobel Prize winners, she filed patents and built clinical programs from her garage. 2 years later, Eli was different. Claire had noticed it since he was a toddler. His memory was sharp, his logic scarily fast. By 5, he could understand diagrams, read signs, and explain how blood worked. She never pushed him, but he thrived anyway. Yet he often asked, "Where's Daddy? And why don't I know him?" Claire always paused before answering. "He made a mistake," she'd say, "but you are never one." Eli listened, quiet but thoughtful. He never cried. He just kept watching the world, like he was piecing together something bigger than anyone else could see. One late afternoon, Claire was rearranging her office shelves. Eli sat nearby, flipping through coloring books. As she moved a thick binder labeled Early Clinicals, a small item clinked onto the floor. Eli picked it up. "Mom, what's this?" She turned, and her heart skipped. It was that old flash drive Mason had once borrowed and never returned. She'd packed it away in her lowest drawer without realizing it. Eli, curious, plugged it into Claire's old lab laptop. A strange interface blinked to life, coded with Mason's usual encryption tricks. Claire sat beside him, eyes glued to the screen. The folders weren't labeled clearly, just numbers and strange gene tags. But one folder caught her eye, Genetic Termination /MG. Her fingers froze above the mouse. She clicked, Inside were lineages, risk charts, DNA reports. One document stopped her heart. Subject 6 viability tests. It was dated 2 weeks before Eli was born. Mason had run a prenatal paternity test. The result? 100% biological match. Claire's stomach turned. That same night, Claire clicked further. Another file read, neurogenetic syndrome risk, high. She stared at Mason's private notes. He hadn't doubted paternity. He had feared genetic exposure. His younger brother had the rare condition years ago. Mason had spent his life burying the truth, building his empire on the illusion of perfect genes. Now, fearing legacy ruin, he tried to erase his own son. Claire trembled. It wasn't rejection. It was cowardice. Not shame of scandal, but terror of imperfection. The mighty doctor ran from a child he helped create. Claire pulled Eli into her arms. He looked up, smiling, unaware of the storm he'd just triggered. But Claire's mind was racing. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about denied existence. Mason had created protocols to erase unwanted genetic outcomes, and Eli had been one of them, only he wasn't broken. He was brilliant. She whispered into her son's hair, "He tried to delete you, but you're the best thing I've ever created." Her eyes went to the screen again. One name flashed across a side folder, Dr. Camille Ford. Claire stared at the name glowing on her screen. Dr. Camille Ford. Her hands trembled slightly as she clicked it. A hidden subfolder appeared. Inside were emails, documents, scanned signatures. One in particular chilled her. Non-disclosure agreement, subject 5. It was a signed NDA between Mason and Camille. Claire's mouth went dry. Camille had been silenced, paid off and erased, just like Mason tried to do to her. But Camille hadn't deleted the file. Mason saved everything and forgot it. Claire copied the entire drive to her laptop. Then she sent one line, "Camille, I think we need to talk." Camille responded within hours. Her reply was simple, "I've been waiting for this day." They met the next morning in a quiet corner of a bookstore cafe. Camille looked composed but worn, like someone who'd spent years swallowing truths. She handed Claire a folder before even sitting. Inside were photos, printed emails, and a typed transcript of a recorded conversation with Mason. "I wasn't the only one," Camille said softly. "There were others. I didn't know about you until now." Claire clutched the folder tight. Their pain overlapped like mirror images. 3 weeks later, Claire moved quietly. She cross-referenced Mason's files with Camille's evidence. The pattern was undeniable. Paternity tests, genetic screenings, hush payments. 5 women, 5 silent stories. Eli wasn't a one-time cruelty. He was a final attempt to erase a legacy Mason feared. But Eli wasn't flawed. He was thriving, healthy, brilliant. Claire reached out to the others. 3 responded. 2 sent their own files. Each had been abandoned, doubted, erased. None knew the others existed. Claire created a locked cloud archive called the Vault, and inside it, she placed everything Mason tried to bury. By spring, Mason's career had soared. He was nominated to chair the National Neuroscience Ethics Board. News outlets celebrated him as the mind architect. Claire watched every announcement in silence. The world saw a genius. She saw cowardice. She didn't want revenge. She wanted reckoning. She submitted a speaking proposal to the Global Medical Integrity Conference, held that summer. Topic: Hidden Lineages, When Power Meets Genetic Erasure. Her name alone caught attention. Whitmore Biogenetics had recently published a paper praised by the CDC. Claire was no longer the woman left in a hospital bed. She had become her own storm. The conference welcomed her quietly, a mid-morning breakout slot. No red carpets, no headlines. Just her, a USB, and a hall full of scientists. Claire wore gray, kept her hair tied back, and stood behind the podium with calm. She spoke clearly. "I'd like to share a case study. It's not hypothetical. It's not fictional. It's real, and it's buried deep inside this industry." Slide after slide, she showed the pattern. Genetic fear, family erasure, DNA cover-ups. The room fell silent. Then gasps echoed when Mason's name appeared beside test results. Her final slide showed Eli's DNA. 100% biological match. No genetic flaw. No syndrome. Just a brilliant little boy denied his father's name. Because of the man's fear. Claire's voice didn't shake. He erased 5 lives, she said. But mine came back stronger. And my son is thriving. When she stepped down, half the audience stood in stunned silence. Mason, who had been scheduled to speak later that evening, quietly left the venue. By the next morning, 3 news outlets picked up the story. 24 hours later, Mason's team tried damage control. They claimed the files were stolen, manipulated, false. But the vault was public by then. Every file, every test, every signed NDA. Camille went on record. 2 other women gave interviews. Claire remained silent. She let the data speak. Mason's board nomination was revoked. His hospital contract suspended. A formal ethics probe was launched. Claire never once appeared on camera. She spent her days in the lab, her nights reading with Eli. One morning, after dropping at school, her phone buzzed. It was Camille. 2 words. It's done. That evening, Claire stood on a rooftop of their townhouse as the sun dipped behind Chicago's skyline. Eli joined her, clutching a juice pouch. He didn't ask questions. He just stood beside her, watching the sky. "Mom," he said softly, "do you think he's sad now that everyone knows?" Claire looked down at him, heart aching with both sorrow and pride. "He should be," she replied, "because the truth didn't break him." She kissed the top of Eli's head. The sky stayed quiet. But something had finally shifted. Claire never told Eli everything. Not yet. He was still just 5. Gifted, yes, but still a child. Still building his view of the world. She answered gently when he asked hard things. She never spoke Mason's name unless Eli brought up. And when he did, she never spoke with hate, only clarity. "You're not what he feared," she'd say. "You're what he missed out on." She saved every article, every email, every clip. One day, Eli would read them, and he'd understand. But for now, she let him play, laugh, dream, because he'd already done enough. Weeks later, Claire found Eli on her office floor, poking through files. He looked up, holding the original flash drive. "This thing," he said, "it caused all that?" Claire nodded slowly. Eli paused and smiled. "I guess he should have taken it with him, huh?" Claire laughed softly. Then he tilted his head. "Mom, do you think he's sorry?" Claire knelt, touched his cheek. "Maybe, but it's not our job to wonder. We've already won." Eli nodded, then whispered something that caught her breath. "I'm glad he didn't keep me." The media storm faded slowly, but Mason's fall was permanent. He lost his chair nominations, advisory positions, and several research affiliations. No court charged him. No judge ruled against him. But his reputation, that was sentenced by public truth. His name became a cautionary tale whispered through hospital corridors and scientific circles. Meanwhile, Claire never gloated. She never showed up for interviews or wrote a book. She just returned to her lab, her son, her peace. She didn't need Mason ruined. She needed Eli restored. And that was already done. 1 month later, Claire was walking Eli home from school one afternoon when a woman approached him on the sidewalk. She looked familiar. "You're Claire, right?" the woman asked softly. "My name's Tara. I was one of the women. I didn't sign anything. I just ran." Claire nodded gently. They didn't need to say more. Tara knelt beside Eli and smiled. "He's beautiful." Eli smiled shyly. Claire offered her card. "If you ever want to talk," she said. Tara nodded, eyes shining. More stories would surface. But for now, even one connection was enough. Claire continued expanding her lab. Whitmore Biogenetics became a trusted name in rare disease research. Patients, once dismissed or misdiagnosed, found answers through her work. She hired single mothers, overlooked scientists, and interns who'd been told no too many times. Eli spent his afternoons in the corner office, building puzzles or asking brilliant questions. Claire built something better than revenge. She built legacy. And not the kind Mason obsessed over, the kind that grows in truth, in kindness, in resilience. Summer afternoon, Mason sent no apology, no letters, no emails, just silence. The same kind he gave him 5 years ago. But Claire didn't need closure from him. She already had it. One night, while putting Eli to bed, she noticed he'd written his name on a notebook. Eli Whitmore. She smiled. "You like that name?" He nodded. "It sounded like me." Claire brushed his hair back and kissed his forehead. "It is you," she whispered. Every letter. That night, she quietly filed paperwork to change his last name legally. Mason's name would not follow them anymore. News about Mason vanished from headlines. His foundation rebranded. His public appearances stopped. But Claire's inbox filled with invitations to panels, conferences, journals. She declined most. She preferred quiet impact over public applause. One evening, she stood before a room of young female researchers and said, "Truth isn't loud. It's constant. It doesn't always destroy. Sometimes it sets people free." Afterward, a student hugged her. "My sister has the same syndrome Mason was hiding. Thank you for speaking." Claire didn't say anything grand. She just nodded, because sometimes quiet courage is the loudest kind. Eli's questions never stopped. One day, while watching a nature documentary, he turned to Claire. "Why do animals protect the weak?" Claire answered thoughtfully, "Because nature knows the weak matter too." He thought for a moment, then asked, "Was I weak when he left?" Claire looked at him. "No, you were never weak. He was." Eli nodded like he understood more than a 5-year-old should. He curled into her side and whispered, "You didn't let him erase me." Claire smiled through the sting in her eyes. "Never," she said. "You're not erasable." Years passed, and Eli grew into himself, brilliant, kind, endlessly curious. He once asked if he could visit Mason. Claire didn't say no. She just asked, "Why?" Eli said, "I want to see what fear looks like." But the moment passed. He never asked again. Instead, he focused on his own world, one filled with questions, stories, and codes. One afternoon, he built a game that used DNA as a puzzle key. Claire watched him with pride and quiet awe. Mason had tried to delete a future. Instead, that future was now writing its own code, line by line. One day, while helping Claire clean old boxes in the garage, Eli held up the original flash drive. "Mom, is this it?" She nodded. "The one that started everything." Eli tilted it. Funny how something so small can be so loud. Claire chuckled. That's how the truth works. He turned it over in his fingers. Why didn't he keep it? Claire thought for a second. Because he didn't think anyone would find it. Eli smiled. "But I did." She ruffled his hair. "Yes, you did." That night, after dinner, Eli sat on the balcony watching stars. Claire joined him with Coco. "Do you ever think about him?" he asked. Claire paused and nodded. "Sometimes, not with anger, just with questions." Eli sipped his drink. "Do you think he's still scared?" Claire smiled softly. "Probably." Eli leaned his head on her shoulder. "Good." Claire laughed gently. "You're allowed to feel that." Then he whispered, "I don't hate him, but I don't miss him either." Claire kissed the top of his head. "That's the balance," she said. "Feeling what you need, letting go of what you don't." As stars glittered over quiet night, Eli looked up again. His voice was soft, thoughtful. "Mom, do you think he's sad now that everyone knows?" Claire looked at him, her brilliant, unbroken boy. She smiled a little sadly. "He should be," she said, "because the truth didn't break him." Claire held him close as the night deepened. Not all stories end with revenge. Some end with understanding, with survival, with choosing peace. And in that silence, under stars and secrets, Eli smiled. He didn't need a name. He had one.